Last time we have seen a particular aspect of Savitri looking into the possibility of going as Sati in the death of Satyavan. But she immediately rules that out, that possibility. She would not like to go as Sati because she sees the necessity of her presence here to help the elderly parents of Satyavan. They would need help and she cannot just walk away from the scene. Well, this may look to be a very simplistic picture for the whole thing of Sati idea and of withdrawing from that action by Savitri. The reason which is indicated here that her old parents-in-law would need her. But as we have seen last time, actually there is a truth in the very ideal of Satihood. It is not there for nothing. And Sri Aurobindo would not have introduced that aspect into his Savitri had there not been any significance attached to the Sati ideal. The other consideration is of course also there. Savitri's old parents-in-law needed her. In fact, this is indicative of a oneness with the entire creation. The parents-in-law stand for the entire world here, helpless, unable to do things in this world, seeking support from young people. This is indicative of the necessity of the incarnate power to come and give them help. It is not just an idea, it is not just a symbol, it is not just a metaphor, it is a spiritual identity of Savitri with this entire creation that is epitomized in the statement of hers that her parents-in-law would need her. That is the real meaning of it. And all along our mission has been to do whatever she has to do as the incarnate Shakti for the good of this creation, for the good of earth and men. That is Savitri's mission. So earth and men are epitomized here in the figures of Satyavan's parents. Now regarding the ideal of Satihood, as I said last time, Sati is a feminine of the word Sat, truth. And she going as Sati would mean she is dedicating herself totally to the ideal of truth, of oneness with the lover. That is the important thing. Oneness with the lover in whether it is in life or in death. That should not make any distinction for her. It should not separate these two for her. It is the oneness between the lover and the beloved that is identified in the ideal of Sati. There is also an occult connotation behind that. When the living soul accompanies the soul which has ceased to be, then it provides him the occult support in his onward journey. He does not go alone then. She is there as Shakti accompanying the spirit of the deceased and it is that which is very valuable, and Sati ideal has a meaning from that point of view. In fact, as I said earlier also, this ideal of Satihood is a Vedic ideal. It has been there in the Vedas, it has been followed in the traditions, it is there in the Ramayana, it is there in the Mahabharata, it is there in the Puranas also, and it is there in Savitri for a certain purpose. Sri Aurobindo would not otherwise introduce that thing into Savitri had it not had that significance, that importance, that bearing, that occult connotation, the power which accompanies the Sati in the whole process. The only question which one might ask is, all right, the husband dies and the wife goes as Sati because there is an occult support for him and it is provided by the wife. Could that also not mean that suppose the wife dies first, will the husband go as Sati? Strictly speaking, it should happen. It should happen. But nowhere in the scriptural literature we have a mention of a husband going as Sati with a dead wife. The reason is perhaps of a different type. The connotation is of a different type. It is the power of the womanhood which is important here. It is not the power of Purusha, but the power of Ishwari, of Prakriti, of Shakti, which is what really helps the deceased on the way after his death. And it is that power which is needed. So, even if a husband would go as Sati, I don't know whether he would be really that effective as a woman going as Sati in that sense. So there is a difference. The other, of course, point is, in the case of a woman, there is a psychic spontaneity in the whole action. She is doing it from the depth of her heart, which is not so much always there in man. And therefore, it cannot carry that power at all in that sense. So the Sati ideal is therefore more connected with the wife than with the husband, accompanying the dead person. Now, the truth of Satihood is there, and even as late as a couple of centuries ago, Madhvacharya, he asserted the value of Satihood in India, in the Indian tradition. He asserted that there is a meaning to Satihood. But unfortunately, the ideal of Satihood applicable for a soul relationship is not always present in human relationship. Most of the time, in fact 99.9999 whatever we call it, the relation between husband and wife is a physical relationship. It is not a soul relationship at all. And therefore, when in social systems, social customs, social traditions, Sati is imposed upon the woman, it becomes an oppression, it becomes a degradation, it loses this true significance of it. And that is exactly what happened during the course of history in India. The true ideal of Satihood is only for those who have spiritually developed, who have acquired occult powers in them, not for common man and woman. So, imposing the condition of Satihood on a woman when her husband dies is a degradation of Satihood. And that has to go away. Last time I told you, Madri went to Sati with Pandu in the Mahabharata. Now, there is something deep in that, and it was accepted. But later, in the traditions, it became an imposition, a rule, a social custom. And whether a young girl would like it or not, all her relatives and the entire society would force her to go as sati. That is the degradation, and that has no value at all. That must be stopped. In fact, when Alexander the Great invaded India about 300 BC, roughly 2300 years ago, one of the learned persons who had accompanied him, he has recorded the traditions of satihood in India, and he says that satihood was practiced in Takshila in those days, and there was a degree of spontaneity in the action. No woman was forced to go as sati. She volunteered. She went of her own as sati with the dead husband. It is also recorded during the Maurya period, about 400 years or so. They are on record, satihood and all that. But these rulers were also cautious, were also particular that no woman is forced by her relatives and the members of the society to go as sati. It should be a voluntary act on her part. That was the tradition. Later it became more rigid and the women were forced to go as sati. During the Mohammedan period, Sultanate regime from 1200 to 1500 AD, they had passed a rule of no woman going as sati without official permission. They had made a rule in that. Well, in a certain sense it was good. Akbar the Great, he had also passed a rule to the same effect. No woman would go as sati without official permission. Satihood was banned. Yet, sati system continued till recent times. During Raja Ram Mohan Roy, it was very prevalent in Bengal. Any widow, young widow or elderly widow, it didn't matter. She had to go as sati with a dead husband. It was he who brought the reformation and stopped satihood in Bengal in around 1850 or so. It was banned. In fact, in Rajasthan, the act of going as satihood continued till 1985, 1987. Continued. Only then, at that time, around that time, the rule was passed that no woman will go as sati. In 1987, recent time. Well, political systems, the kings, imposing this condition is a good sign, because the dictator system has no value at all and somebody has to stop it. The only person who can stop it is the power and authority. You only can do that thing. Social system, our system is a dictator system. In fact, at one place, Sri Aurobindo says that the Hindu house is in half ruins. this imposition of sati on women is a part of that half-ruined house. It has no value. It has to go away. It cannot stay at all. So that was necessity. And it is good that even the Muslims had imposed this condition on the Hindus going to sati. But also there is another side of women as going sati. We have the famous Jauhar in Rajasthan, when the Muslims invaded the country or conquered the kingdom and massacred the soldiers. Most of the women voluntarily went as sati in Rajasthan. They immolated themselves on the burning fire so that they are not caught by the Muslims and spoiled, deformed, misused, abused. This kind of a thing would not happen for them. And in that sense, there is something very noble about this large number of women going to sati at Jauhar in the traditions of Rajasthan. Earlier, at the end of the Vijayanagar Empire, Ramaraya, he was defeated by the confederation of Muslim states in the south, and the whole empire collapsed. Hampi was in ruins at that time. But the form roots of noble Hinduism were present in the souls of the society. And a very large number of women, after the battle of Talikota, went as sati, sacrificed themselves because they would not like to be captured and misused by the Muslim, by the conquerors. They went as sati. Now, that is a part of karma which is accumulated on the positive side of the society, and that is what makes it more valuable. It gives a value, nobility, significance, a kind of a dynamism to the society. So that aspect of sati is perfectly alright. It is a voluntary act for a noble cause going to sati. But forcing a woman to go as sati, that is a terrible degradation, and that is not acceptable at all. So, when Savitri is thinking of going as sati, she is going as sati in the nobility of the satihood. In that sense, she is not forced by anybody at all. She did not go at all. She would not be forced by anybody at all. And she is a woman who will not be coerced, cannot be coerced, will not obey if there is something against her will. Savitri is always firm in her will, and whatever she decides, that she will perform. She will act according to that. So that is the ideal of satihood, which is being kind of touched upon en passant in Savitri. In fact, describing social themes, describing philosophical themes, describing religious themes, poetic themes, themes of various kinds, is the aspect of the richness of an epic. Epic comprises all these dimensions, and it touches upon in a very crucial way on every aspect of this relationship, of this life in which we live. And that is what really makes Shri Savitri also very powerful, very rich, very comprehensive, very absorbing, very educative in terms of social organization, very significant in terms of guidelines. And it is that which we don't normally understand when we approach Savitri. read Savitri, study Savitri. These are necessary things. Social reflections are there and they have to be caught and explored and implemented. In other words, so to say, everything is present in Savitri. Our task is to have applied Savitri. We have to prepare ourselves to understand, grasp, go into the depth of Savitri and apply it in life, in social systems, in organization, in our workings, in our thought, in our feelings, in our actions. It has to be applied. That is what is necessary for us to do when we take up Savitri. Of course, it is the help for spiritual growth, for the transformative power it has down to the physical. But that does not mean that Savitri does not have other elements present in it. They are there in their full richness and in their power and in their efficacy. So let us read a couple of lines in that context and see what we have here. Often it seemed to her the age's pain had pressed the quintessence into her single woe, concentrating in her a tortured world. In a single woe, his quintessence is brought, is condensed, the pain, the anguish, the suffering, the torture of the whole creation. Savitri's woe is so vast, so deep, so intense that it has absorbed every element of anguish of this creation into it. And therefore, if she can resolve that thing in her soul, it will be automatically be resolving even in the world. It is that power. She has absorbed the entire woe in her woe. And if she can eliminate that woe from her soul, it means that that woe is removed from this entire world. That is what Savitri is up to. Often it seemed to her the ages pain, not today's, tomorrow's, yesterday's, but of ages, we, all the things we have been suffering. This transient and sorrowful world, anityam, asukham, painful world, all those things are here, and she has gathered the entire creation's pain in her pain. So if that pain in her can be removed, it means automatically the pain of the world will also disappear. Had pressed the quintessence into a single woe, concentrating in her a tortured world. Thus, in the silent chamber of her soul, cloistering her love to live with secret grief, she dwelt like a dumb priest with hidden gods, unappeased by the wordless offering of her days, lifting to them her sorrow like frankincense, her life the altar, herself the sacrifice. So what is she doing? What is she going to do now? She will pick up the pain which is there in her soul, in her heart, and lit the yajna fire and put that pain, that yajna fire, that it is purified, it is dissolved, that it disappears. She is becoming a priestess. She is going to perform a sacrifice. She is going to light a yajna and put the pain in that fire. How? In the silent chamber of her soul. That is the most important thing. She will not be disturbed by pain and grief, not even by the thought of the death of her husband. She is tortured, she is anguished, she is not in know of how she is going to tackle the moment of death. She has no idea, no hint of it. But within in a silent cell, in her soul deep within, she sits there, and in the silent chamber of her soul, cloistering her love, closing up her love, to live with secret grief, not only her grief, but the grief of the entire world. It is that which is gathered in her grief. Secret grief also means secret because she only knows. Her husband has no idea about her grief. Satyavan has no idea why Savitri could be sorrowful. Her parents-in-law had no idea. The rishis in the forest, they had no hint that Savitri must be harboring in her soul some grief. Therefore, it is a secret grief also on an individual level. It is also a grief which is deeply hidden in the creation, which is not known to us. It is that which is gathered by her in her grief. Cloistering her love to live with secret grief, she dwelt like a dumb priest with hidden gods. The gods are standing there, and she is standing in front of them like a priestess to worship them with all the grief gathered in her soul. Now, who are these hidden gods? Well, unappeased by the wordless offering her days, these gods, they are not satisfied by her daily offerings. She is praying, she is pleading, she is weeping, she is offering her tears to them, but they are not satisfied, they remain unappeased. Unappeased with the wordless offering of her days, lifting to them her sorrow like frankincense, Dhoop, the way in which you burn dhoop, and it rises. It is in that manner that she is putting her sorrow in the fire that it may rise and please these gods, but these gods are not pleased. They remain adamant. The secret gods, the hidden gods, they remain adamant. They demand their own price. Without that, there is no help available. Her life, the altar, she has made her own life the Yajna Kunda. Herself the sacrifice, Yajna. Her life has become the Yajna Kunda. She herself has become the Yajna fire. And in that fire she is offering her sorrow like frankincense, like dhoop burning and going up there, frankincense, dhoop, that is the gum from a tree, whitish in color, and it is a fragrance also, beautiful fragrance. Now frankincense is having to some extent the Christian connotation also. When Christ was born and when the three wise men came to know about the birth of the Son of God, they went to the place where he was born and they offered him the precious gifts. These three wise men, Vijay, they went to the place where he was born, the manger, and offered him three gifts. The gift of frankincense, mahir, gold, dhoop, gogul, as you call it, gogul, and gold, sona. These are the three precious gifts of the religious tradition, most valuable in the tradition, and that is the best you can offer to God. Savitri is offering such a best thing, frankincense of her life, and the Yajna fire. frankincense is mentioned in Saint Matthew, is mentioned also Saint Luke. It has a traditional biblical significance. To some extent, the description which we have here has that element in it, the Christian element Sri Vendu has introduced here. But at the same time, it is applicable to the yajna system we have in India. In India, we normally don't put dhoop or gur in the yajna. We put sandalwood. We put ghee, purified, sanctified ghee. We put that ghee. We put other ahutis in the yajna, not frankincense. So in that sense, frankincense has more a connotation of a Christian tradition here. Let us read that passage again. Thus, in the silent chamber of her soul, cloistering her love to live with secret grief, she dwelt like a dumb priest with hidden gods, unappeased with the wordless offering of her days, lifting to them a sorrow like frankincense, her life the altar, herself the sacrifice. This is a very powerful description, very rich, very elaborate in details, conveying so many aspects of spiritual philosophy, of occult knowledge in a few lines, just 6 lines. Everything is kind of presented so swiftly, so suggestively, so concretely also, with all the deep occult connotation. Now here the phrase, she dwelt like a dumb priest. Savitri is a dumb priest. Why dumb? Because she is helpless. She has become speechless. She doesn't know what to do. The grief is there. Tomorrow my husband is going to die. And she has no idea of what she is going to do. She does not even know how to pray to the gods. She is going to offer her life to them, but she has no idea how to pray to them. And who are these gods? These hidden gods. These are the powers of the inconscience which are standing in front of her. Evil, falsehood, death, ignorance, suffering, misery. These are the powers, these are the hidden gods of this creation rising from the inconscience. And Savitri is going to be facing them. She is making her life a sacrifice in front of them. And she does not know whether they will be satisfied by the sacrifice. But the point is, in a spiritual occult, action, she has already come to the stage. She is facing all those hidden gods in front of her, and she has to make a sacrifice. Yes, she is going to make a sacrifice. She is not going to go ascetic. She is going to meet them face to face, take the challenge, and see that they are not there. Her life, the altar, herself the sacrifice. Only when the Supreme Incarnate Shakti makes such a sacrifice can these gods, these hidden gods, these powers rising from the inconscience can be conquered, can be subdued at least. It is that stage to which Savitri has already arrived without doing yoga. Her yoga is yet to start, in fact. Her yoga is yet to start. She is simply weighing the pros and cons of going sati, this thing, that thing, and whatnot and whatnot. But she has already come. Look, all these gods are standing here, and what am I going to do? She has no idea of that. What am I going to do? That knowledge will come to her when she sets herself on the yoga. She will be guided to do this by the Supreme Guide. She will follow that path, and then, until then, she is dumb, she is mute, She is helpless. She is simply doing it as a part of certain psychological elements which are already present in her, and therefore they are standing there in front of her, lifting to them a sorrow like frankincense. See what a beautiful thing. The sorrow itself has become a frankincense. It doesn't happen normally. She had a power to purify, to make it glorious, even the sorrow. That is the power of the Shakti. When she is weeping, when she is crying, even a sorrow can become so powerful, so beautiful, so holy, so sacred, so serene, so acceptable. That is the power of the Shakti doing her actions here. Now, we have, well, let us see something which is very important in this connection. Maybe we can see that quickly. See, this element, unappeased with the wordless offering of her days, unappeased, these gods, the hidden powers, have remained unhappy. This we are seeing here in Book 7, Canto 1, almost toward the end of the book. But the yogi poet has already introduced this particular element in the first canto itself, the book of beginning, December dawn. And we can see the connection between this and what is presented in December dawn in a very brief manner. Page 11. Savitri is weighing pros and cons, whether to do this, to do that, what not. And then what happens here? All came back to her. The moment of decision is that everything comes back to her. She is suddenly becoming aware of what she is supposed to do. All earth and love and death is standing in front of her. Yes, I am here for the earth. Yes, I am here to do the will of my God. Yes, I am here to conquer death. Death who is standing across the path of the divine event. Death who is standing as an obstacle in the supramental manifestation. It is that which has to go away. So all has suddenly come back to her when she is grieving in the presence of Satyavan in the hermitage. All came back to her, earth and love and doom, the ancient disputants, they are the ones who are calling. The soul of the earth, death establishing its law of mortality on the earth, and love trying to get out of it so that the divine manifestation becomes possible. He becomes free of death. Only when love is free of death, that a divine manifestation becomes possible. All came back to her, earth and love and doom. The ancient disputants encircled her, like giant figures wrestling in the night. The goddess from the dim inconscient born. See here, the goddess from the dim inconscient born, the hidden goddess, gods, what we have seen here. The hidden gods is what we have got in the book of Yoga here. And here it says, the goddess from the dim inconscient born. It is they who are now appearing in front of Savitri when she is grieving and she does not know what to do. She is making her life a sacrifice, but she is not in a position to what further action she has to go. The goddess from the dim inconscient born awoke to struggle and a pang divine. She has a pang. It is not her personal pang. It is not a human pang. It is not the pang of Savitri. It is not the pang of yours or mine, of man, of the small creature here. It is the pang divine. It is divine himself who is feeling the pain of this condition. of the spirit. And it is that pang, that divine pang, which has now sort of awakened in her soul. And therefore, about the struggle and the pang divine and the shadow of her flaming heart at the somber center of the dire debate, a guardian of the unconsoled abyss. He, the one who is guarding this inconscience, this abysm of night, it is that guardian who is standing there. Savitri is facing you. A guardian of the unconsoled abyss, inheriting the long agony of the globe of this entire creation of the universe. It is he who has inherited the agony of this creation, and it is he who is standing in front of her. A guardian of the unconsoled abyss, inheriting the long agony of the globe, a stone still figure is mute, calm, immovable, like a stone statue, firm, fixed, huge statue, standing across the path of divine way. It is he who is standing there. Stone still figure of high and godlike pain. Pain is personified here. P is capital. It is that pain, divine pain, the godlike pain, who has personified himself, is standing like a statue in front of Savitri. Savitri has to meet him. And it is that statue, Savitri is offering her arghya, her ahutis, her every bit of emotion. But he remains unappeased. He is not satisfied at all with all her offerings. What else does he want? She has no idea of that. Why is he not satisfied? What else does he want? A stone still figure of high and godlike pain stared into space with fixed, regardless eyes. They saw grief's timeless depths, but not life's goal. That pain sees the age-old grief, why it is there and all that thing. But it has no knowledge what is the goal of this life. He is standing there mute, calm, firm, staring into all these things. He will not allow any traveler to cross him unless he is answered by this question. Why? What is the goal of life? Unless somebody answers that, we will not allow him to move forward. Standing there. Now it is Savitri who is going to answer him. Yes, this is the aim of life. I am here to achieve this aim. I am here to see that all that stands in the way of achieving this aim is removed. That is what Savitri is going to do.